All right, let's continue the discussion by talking specifically about values, and we'll focus on our own society for just a minute. So we're going to talk about modern America, modern U.S. society, and the values that we would consider to be core values. A couple of points real quickly to make before we get into the list is America is a very pluralistic society, so we gathered our culture, and we certainly are not defined as a society by being any one particular culture. We'll certainly go into that discussion a little more in future modules, but basically we have many different religious, ethnic interest groups that combined over time to form our core values that might be different than, let's say, a culture, to use an example like Japan, which would be considered not very pluralistic, kind of singular in its cultural heritage, ethnic groups, religious groups. So you'd see much more of a kind of focused source of the core values for that society, whereas in the United States, clearly we derived our core values from many different sources. Having said that, so a sociologist by the name of Robin Williams in 1965 proposed a list of what he said were the 12 core values of American society. The author of the text that we're using, Henslin, in 2014, an early edition of the text that we're using, added another 3, hence the little line here, and the last 3 were proposed by Henslin. But basically what Henslin and Williams both postulate is that these are the, again, abstract notions, values are exactly that, symbols, that make up what they say are the core values of our society. So they propose that achievement, again, kind of constantly moving forward and gaining things, individualism, a sense of being our own specific people and standing out from the other people in society, activity and work, again, we've kind of touched on that before, the idea of being busy, having a job or an occupation in society, efficiency, doing things quicker, better, faster, science and technology. I think we look around our society and we realize that we are very much in love with our science and technology. Progress, again, that kind of example of always moving forward, making positive benefits and advancements in society. Material comfort, the appreciation of what we sometimes will probably refer to as the finer things, or things that make us happy and comfortable. Humanitarianism, taking care of other people. Freedom, obviously, clearly we've already touched on that, the idea of not being able to be told what to do. Democracy, that we engage in a representative system in which all people are said to have a voice in society. Equality, the idea that, and again, this is, you go back to some of our main documents, all men are created equal, that everybody should be treated the same. Racism and group superiority, that there are different groups in our society based on racial or ethnic characteristics, and that some of those groups are superior to others. Education, the idea, obviously, of passing on learning and making that a core fundamental value in our society. Religiosity, we look around and we realize that we are fundamentally a very religious society. We have many varying, but for the most part, most people in society identify as having some type of ideas about belief in a higher being or an afterlife. And romantic love and monogamy. In our society, we place a lot of emphasis on the idea of being attracted to other people romantically, and that when we form bonds, we form them with one other person at a time, especially when we talk about legal or formal marriage. Okay, so if we take a look at that list, we see some, probably right off the top of the bat, and I can imagine some of your reactions when I was just kind of casually reading through this list. I usually get this reaction from students in a live classroom. I read racism and group superiority, and I see people's attitudes being like, what? That's a core value in our society? No, we're supposed to be a society which is against that. And then I sometimes point out, well, if we're a society that's against it, then why do we see so much of it existing in society every day? We definitely, when we get to the module on racial and ethnic groups and attitudes in society, we'll clearly see that a large portion of our society is based on the idea of these beliefs in racism and group superiority. And then I usually ask people and say, and contradict, do any of these values contradict one another? And right next to each other, we can clearly see equality and racism clearly contradict each other. And when we think about our own society, we can say we are a society that says that all people are created equal. I left out the word man there because clearly when we talk about the idea of equality, we don't just mean among men. We mean, of course, among women as well. Does that mean that that's exactly what goes on in society? Of course not. So this brings us to the idea of the difference between ideal and real culture. All right? Ideal culture is usually what a society proclaims to be, or its core values as stated are those things that they say that they want to be. In our society, we clearly hold ourselves to a very high standard, and we say that all people are created equal and that everyone in society has an equal shot. But then we look at real society, the ways that society actually plays out, and the rules and norms and all the other institutions that are in place, how they actually live up to those values. And we can clearly see that in a lot of cases the difference between real and ideal cultures are very great. Okay? So we can certainly say that as a society we exist in an atmosphere of saying that we're an equal society and all people should be given the same opportunities and treated the same. But our real culture is one in which, again, we can look at a core value and recognize that racism and group superiority, ideas of group superiority, still very much exist. So those are the two that clearly stand out when we talk about contradictions. But then I'll usually ask, okay, are there other contradictory values on here? Again, I'll just throw a couple of them out. A lot of times we talk about the clashes between science and technology and religion. Okay? Science obviously demands proof and backing for what it says, whereas religiosity is very much belief based on faith. That doesn't require substantive evidence or proof to have a belief. You can talk about the idea of material comfort and, let's say, humanitarianism. Okay? If material comfort in our society insists that we should be spending more money and energy and resources on ourselves to make ourselves happy, that can contradict the idea of taking care of other people. Okay? So clearly we know that there can be contradictions in a society's values, and a lot of times that's the distinction between that society's ideal and real culture. Again, these last three were added by Henslin in a later edition of his. So we have Williams' Core 12, Henslin's edition of these other three. If we want to take a look at how societies differ, clearly if we look at different societies, will we see different core values? Of course we would. Again, another example, and I'm going to go back to using the culture of, or society of Japan. In America, we say individualism as a very highly prized core value, that we all should stand out from each other, vanity license plates, and everybody should have a car that looks different than everybody else's, and we decorate our homes and make everything look very, very, very individualistic. We like to stand out from each other and be identified readily. In a society like Japan, individualism is not probably we do not consider to be a core value. In fact, you might actually say that a core value in a society like Japan might be conformity, looking like everybody else, not standing out from the crowd, looking and behaving and acting like every single other person in society is much more of a core value than we would say individualism is in our society. Another good example in our society, clearly we have an interest in romantic love and monogamy. In other societies that might not be a core value, especially in a society, let's say, that in which arranged marriages are part of the society or culture. It might be much more important to the people involved that a marriage be beneficial to the families of the people rather than the individuals who are getting married. So we would say that romantic love is not as important. So we can clearly see that there's many differences when we compare cultures in their core values. We can also use the idea of establishing a society's core values to identify what we sometimes refer to as value clusters. Sometimes we can take a look at groups of core values to explain things, higher abstractions. For instance, if I said to you, what does it mean in America to be successful? Well, we would probably look at it as we usually define success as what type of job you have, what's your activity and work. Again, progress, we would probably put that. Education, we would probably look at material comfort. How many things do you own? What kind of house do you have? What kind of car do you drive? Do you have a vacation home, a boat? How much vacation do you take? So clearly we can look at things and we can cluster some core values into describing larger abstractions. If I said to you, what is the definition of happiness in our society? You would probably, again, kind of talk about things like material comfort. Certainly in our society, romantic love is a key. For a lot of people, it might be things like religion or what type of job you have. So again, happiness might mean something completely different in another society. Another society with a different amount of core values would define happiness in a completely different way based on a different cluster of values. Henslin also talks about the idea that as societies change, values can change. Now, if we look at this core group of values, we can probably see that values do not change quickly. They change very, very, very slowly. Even when societies sometimes go through rapid changes, the core values of that society usually don't change very quickly. In fact, the opposite of that, they tend to resist change and change very, very, very slowly. So once again, we can say in our society, clearly we know at one time in our society, racism and group superiority was a core value that was reinforced by rules and laws. So when America was a slave society, we clearly believed that some groups were superior to others, and that was exemplified. Now we can say that, nearly 150 years later, society or slavery has been illegal, and yet that core value, to a certain degree, still exists in our society. There's still many people in our society with the core belief that some groups are superior to others. Okay? So while society can change very quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean that core values change. Henslin specifically talked about the idea of what he called some emerging values, that as society changes, values can also change. Basically just put his short list up here of what he called emerging values. And Henslin's not willing to put these on a list of what he would call core values because he feels like they haven't, quote unquote, kind of made it to that list yet. But when he talks about the idea of what might in the future become more core values, he forwards these ideas. So let me just write these up here real quick. So fulfillment. Okay, so what Henslin basically saying is that society, as society changes, we see perhaps what might be considered to be core values that are coming along. So Henslin defined leisure as more of an interest in downtime in our society, more of an interest in things like vacation, time spent with family, and that's becoming more and more and more important in our society as more and more people become more interested in accumulating more vacation, demanding vacation as a part of salary and compensation when you take a job. Also, we can definitely tell that there's entire industries based around the idea of Americans spending their free time. So we talk about cruise lines, we talk about travel industry, we talk about the existence of amusement and theme parks. Okay, these are all things which point to an American demand for leisure. Self-fulfillment, the idea that we should all in some ways be happy a lot of the time. Again, I usually, when I ask students to define for me how we know that self-fulfillment is becoming more and more of a core value in society, I usually challenge them, go into any bookstore, go into a Barnes & Noble or any large bookstore, and one of the largest sections you're going to find in that area, the largest single category of books, self-help. Okay, we're all very concerned with making sure that we as human beings are happy and fulfilled. Physical fitness, once again, in our society for a long time, when people were considered physically fit, they usually got that way at their jobs or because of the work that they did. Nowadays, society's changed, and we do know that we have more of a preoccupation with physical fitness based on things like gyms. The fact that gyms exist in almost every community, and sometimes multiple times, and the amount of time people spend on that. Youthfulness. Once again, Henlon proposes that we as a society are becoming more and more preoccupied with looking young all the time. We can clearly demonstrate that through our advertisements, the things, our ideals of beauty, as well as one of the largest rising segments of the healthcare industry is the plastic surgery industry, okay, and cosmetic surgery. And then environmental concern. Clearly, we as a society are becoming much more aware of our impact on society or on the environment, and are taking a lot of steps. So just the fact that we spend a considerable amount of our energy and time every week into recycling, making sure we're putting things in the correct bins, that we keep, that we sort and put out recycling every week, is a good example of our individual. So as these values become emerging values, will they contradict potentially some of the core values that we saw earlier? Well, clearly leisure goes up against the ideas of activity and work and progress. So we're going to definitely see that as society progresses, some of our values may change.